Dr. Klaper, welcome back to Melbourne. It's fantastic to see you again.
Thank you so much.
Fantastic.
It's great to be here.
We've welcomed you with showers, which is probably a 180 from your typical Californian weather that you experience. But look, you've got to have some variation in life, don't you?
Absolutely. It makes everything green. It's
It
wonderful.
does indeed. It does indeed.
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Klaper, thank you so much again for having the time to have an interview today.
Sure.
I want to talk a bit about plant-based medicine, and particularly why it's important, and also why young doctors should be hopefully incorporating it into their practice. Can you tell me a little bit about where you trained, where you studied, and where you now work?
Okay. Well, I had a conventional medical education. I graduated from the University of Illinois College of Medicine in Chicago, one of the top 10 medical schools in the United States. And I received a solid medical education, did a year of internship in Vancouver, straight medicine, and then took, in preparation for rural medicine, I took additional training in anesthesiology, surgery, orthopedics, and obstetrics at the University of California, San Francisco. I was a pretty well-equipped primary care doc, and for the first 10 years of my practice, worked in operating rooms, emergency rooms, general practice offices, dealing mostly with acute care medical issues. But as years went by, I realized that I really wasn't being much good to my sickest patients. They're overweight, they had high blood pressure, diabetes, clogged arteries, inflammation of various tissues, and I really didn't know what to tell them. Every time I looked in the medical text for the cause of high blood pressure, the cause of diabetes, I'd run into these two words, etiology unknown. We don't know what causes these, but work with these medicines, and when the smart guys in the lab figure it out, we'll give you the magic pill. And I didn't know what to tell my patients. They were getting more obese and sicker, and I was just hoping they wouldn't have their heart attack when I was on call. And that was a pretty sad state to be practicing medicine in. I left general practice, went into anesthesia, and did almost 2 years of an anesthesia residency, and found myself in the operating rooms on the cardiovascular anesthesia service. And day after day, I'm watching surgeons open people's chest and remove this yellow guck from their arteries, atherosclerosis. And I began to realize that this is largely the fat of the diet these people are eating. And my dad died of clogged arteries, and I knew I was going to be laying on that operating table with that striker saw going up my sternum, and I sure didn't want that. And the studies were already, this is the early 80s, and the studies were already starting to show up in the books that an animal-based diet, meat and dairy and cholesterol are the major culprits, and a whole food plant-based diet can melt away these plaques. Dr. Dean Ornish was starting to get his works in the literature. But Dr. Frey Ellis back in the 70s published a study of this fellow who had bad angina, went on a vegan diet, and he's climbing mountains 6 months later. So I adopted a plant-based diet out of prudence, and magic happened in my body. Within 12 weeks, a 10-kilo spare tire of fat around my waist melted away. My high blood pressure normalized, my high cholesterol normalized. And I felt great waking up in a nice lean body and running 5 miles every morning. And at that point I realized I didn't want to be an anesthesiologist and spend my days putting people to sleep. I'd rather go back to general practice and help them wake up. And so I did. And that was 35 years ago, and ever since I've been practicing a plant-based style of medicine. And it's the most gratifying kind of medicine I could hope to practice. These people get healthy right in front of my eyes. You get them on a whole food plant-based diet, which we'll talk about, but lots of salads and soups and lentil stews, and the obesity melts away, and the high blood pressure goes down, and the arteries open up, and the angina ceases, and the asthmatic lungs clear, and the psoriatic plaques in the skin go away, and the sore joints fade, and they feel healthy again. And that's the best kind of medicine this old doc can practice. So I've been a plant-based doc and a big fan of seeing the wonderful changes that happen because of it.
You know, it's so interesting because when we go through training, we're always told about the progression of treatment and the stepwise approach to treatment. So whether we take asthma, for example, or even hypertension, you commence, say, with 2.5 milligrams of perindopril, and then you go to 5, and then you go to 10, and then you might link it with amlodipine, for example. There's never an approach that says, let's get them off medication. Now, one would therefore say, well, if we are doing everything we can for patients, why is there a need then to progress with our statins and progress with our, ACE inhibitors? So therefore, there must be a deficiency somewhere in the environment that's the cause of this. Because a common thing that I get told by my patients is, Dad had high cholesterol, Dad had a heart attack, so therefore I'm going to have a heart attack. And they're saying this to me when they're in their late 50s, early 60s. Now, I always come back at them and say, but you've been otherwise well until now. You didn't have this heart problem when you were 20. You didn't have high cholesterol when you were 20. So there is something else that's taken place rather than genetic causes that's led to this occurrence. Let's have a talk about the environment and what you so wonderfully, eloquently talk about as in the SAD approach to life.
Indeed. People trap themselves with this thought form, well, it's my genetics. I'm fated to get this disease. Yeah. And it's true, we inherit our genes from our parents, but what people don't realize was what we also inherit is our eating habits at the dining room table. Right. And if you eat the same meat and cheese and ice cream and pepperoni pizzas that your parents ate, with those genes, you're going to get the same clogged arteries. But we now understand through the whole amazing science of nutrigenomics that our genetic blueprints are not written in stone. We have the genes, but whether these genes actually express in disease is determined by largely the food we eat and other things, the stress levels and the cigarette smoking. But by and large, it's the food that washes through our cells with every meal, turns genes on, turns genes off, induces enzymes, makes enzymes fade away. Every meal brings in not only nutrition, brings in information, and every meal changes us on a molecular genetic level, and that's a great power. And because you don't have to be a geneticist to understand that the genes that are going to be turned on by a chili dog, fried eggs, black coffee, and beer are different than the genes that are going to be turned on by a big green salad and some steamed broccoli and kale and lentil stew. And the genes the molecules that come in from a whole food, and I'm saying whole food, like plants grow out of the ground there. Not talking about energy drinks and granola bars. We're talking about real food. The chemical message that those molecules bring to our tissues, it kind of gives the message, shh, calm down, so you let the inflammation subside, nothing's stirring up trouble here. Where the fried foods and the cooked meat proteins and the hydrogenated oils and the refined sugars that are in the standard Western diet, they bring a message of mutiny and chaos and molecular
and inflammation. And because inflammation. See, we spoke about this previously, that at the core, in my belief, of the chronic diseases that we now have and we experience, and really the main ones, we're talking about obesity, hypertension, hypercholesterolemia, obviously leading to vascular disease and so forth, lies inflammation. It's an inflammatory process that's driving it. Now, whether we talk about arthritis or diabetes, it's an inflammatory process. So there are trigger factors, like you say, that switch on these processes. And as much as we love to use steroids like prednisolone and so forth that try and dampen down that process, how wonderful it is that the food can do that. I have this saying to my patients when I am talking to them about this. I say to them, when you were 8 years old and you would fall over and you would graze your knee, now within 2 or 3 days it would be completely healed. Genetically, that repair mechanism has never ever been lost. Every cell in the human body still has that blueprint, that wonderful genetic blueprint that they open up and say, right, we need to repair the cell by doing this, repair that. What unfortunately, in my view, takes place is that for 3 times a day, over the many, many, many years of life, those repair mechanisms or that repair blueprint gets slightly dirtied, slightly messy. And so therefore, there is this reduced capacity to heal. It makes sense, therefore, if we remove the mud from the cell and we now replace and clean the cell 3 times a day by what we feed ourselves, that the repair mechanism switches back on. And this would certainly explain, in my view, why people suddenly lose the weight, why their sugars stabilize, why the insulin response to the cell is much more better enhanced, why people feel better, they sleep better, their sinuses clear up, and so forth. All the wonderful things that take place. Because people don't recognize, in my view, that they are actually in a disease state. They're in a state of war. And again, using the hypertension story, when we are using medication, we are making the numbers look good, but there is that internal war going on within the cell and the cells around the vessel where they are trying to constrict and they are trying to raise the blood pressure. And these enzymes are being told that we're giving patients are telling them to settle down. It makes the numbers look good, but we don't actually do anything in terms of turning off that process. We are told somewhat inappropriately that, if you have a varied diet, you'll be okay. Have a small amount of oil, have a small amount of animal product, have a small amount of milk. Why, from a medical perspective, are these foods so bad for us?
As you said, the food is a very dynamic stimulus, and it brings us not only calories to burn, but again, as I said, information that changes the inflammatory state in our body. You mentioned some very profound mechanisms there. We are now becoming aware of the role that inflammation plays in so many things, including things that didn't look primarily inflamed, clogged arteries, diabetes, etc. I would like to make an important point, I think, something that's shaping up both in the media and the public mind is, well, that problem, that bad old inflammation, well, let's kill that. We're Americans, we like to kill things. Got a high cholesterol, let's take out the statin, let's kill that. But the analogy, I think, is important to consider. Cholesterol was made the enemy number one, but cholesterol is not an evil molecule. It's the rootstock from which your body makes cortisol and adrenaline and cortisol and steroids, etc., steroid hormones. Same way, inflammation, not an evil process. It's the first stage of healing, and the body is really looking out for you. It's not, let's find that bad old inflammation and stomp it down with some ibuprofen or something. That's not the point. If you are walking a mountain trail and you get a stone in your shoe, and every time you step on it, it's digging into the bottom of your foot, eventually it's going to start getting inflamed there. And you'll feel the pain there. Now, I've got inflammation. What should I do? Oh, well, got inflammation. Let's take an anti-inflammatory. And so you take the ibuprofen, and it helps for an hour or two. But meanwhile, that's not getting to the root of the problem. You've got a mechanical problem. You've got to stop, take your shoe off, take the stone out of your shoe. And it's not a matter of suppressing inflammation. These meals that you mentioned, these are repetitive injuries to those arteries. It's the repetitive injury that our diet's inflicting. That's what's driving the inflammation. So rather than focusing on the inflammatory process, let's focus on what's making your body summon up that response. And of course, it's fried meats and hydrogenated oils and the free radicals and the French fries and the phosphoric acid and the soft drinks. And it's the standard fast food Western diet is just tailor-made to set off inflammatory reactions throughout the body.
And we now know this because we're seeing not just this on, say, websites and blogs of people with no medical knowledge. We're seeing publications such as NEGM, for example, talking about trimethylamine oxide production from choline from gut bacteria. Now, we're seeing this, as you say, published maybe as far back as Walter Kempner in the rice diet. And I have a particular fascination and interest with nephrotic syndrome and renal medicine. To see him reverse nephrotic syndrome in a matter of months by just using the rice diet, wasn't that just amazing?
Spectacular.
Yet I didn't know about that
until the 1930s?
Until John McDougall talked about it. It's almost criminal that we don't know about this.
Exactly.
As we see now more and more publications come forward about this, I think we also start to recognize a lot of the pathophysiology behind these conditions. Now, Neil Bernard talks very well about diabetes and intramyocellular lipid accumulation. And the essence, I suppose, also of cholesterolemia is that I say to my patients, cholesterol, as you say, has been demonized. It hasn't. It should never have been demonized. Neither should LDL be demonized. LDL forms a particular role within the body. Its role, I say to my patients, is to transport all that cholesterol to the periphery of the body, where it is somewhat utilized by end organs, for, as you say, steroid synthesis, etc., etc. But it forms a purpose. We can't therefore demonize that little molecule. The body wants to protect itself. As you saw, what the analogy you used with the pebble in the foot was beautiful. The body wants to protect itself always, and it wants to survive. So when we feed ourselves these high energy foods, the body doesn't know that it's 2017. The body could think that we're living in the tundra, that it's an ice age, and it recognizes this very high density food, calorie density food, and it says, I have to store this.
It.
Oh, now he's given me some cholesterol as well. I could use that for some hormone production. So what I'll do is I might just store that in the arteries, and I'll put it into the cells of the muscles and so forth. Now what happens, unfortunately, as you say, is that we don't recognize the pebbles in the shoe until it starts to cause pain. And once it causes pain, we have a choice, don't we? Our choice being that, okay, do we look at what the cause is? Can we remove it? Can we improve our walking and so forth? Or do we just take an anti-inflammatory? We are very, very good at giving anti-inflammatories, per se, for all chronic conditions.
That's right.
The importance, therefore, of recognizing that the body wants to survive and it will do whatever it can to maintain a survival state is important. I have seen, as we spoke about this recently, I've seen some remarkable changes in my patients. The 4 diabetics, for example, all insulin diabetics, type 2, but they were insulin dependent, got off their insulin, got off their oral hypoglycemics. Now, what happened when they got off their tablets wasn't just an improvement with their diabetes. Their blood pressure fell, their weight fell. And then I had the luxury of taking them off their ACE inhibitors and off their beta blockers. Yes. We spoke about this, that we were never taught that at medical school. We were never taught that you could actually do that. The essence of what I guess we've been circulating around is this whole foods plant-based diet that we advocate to our patients. So I have 3 simple rules. I like Caldwell Esselstyn's analogy that don't eat anything that had a mother or a face or was alive, so to speak. I say to my patients, the second rule I want you to maintain is that you limit as much as possible the oils. And the third thing is exercise is optional. Now, when I say this to them, they fall off their seats. And they say, but exercise is the core of weight loss. It's the core of our health. And I have to limit my calories and I've got to exercise. And I say to them, let's repair the body first and see what happens. Inevitably, at week 1 or 2 of this diet, they come running in, not walking and hobbling in. They come running in and they say, I know you said no exercise, but I have so much energy. I've started walking around the block. I've started doing things. And it's this ability to say, take a Mitsubishi Lancer car that I drive, and I love my Mitsubishi, and turn it into a Mercedes-Benz, so to speak, by simply just mechanically repairing it. So the essence of this whole foods plant-based diet, it revolves around the idea that we go back to nature, that we don't have processed foods. So the fresh fruit, the vegetables, the corn, the beans, the lentils, the grains. We're talking much more heavily now about carbohydrate because carbohydrate got demonized. The pumpkin, corn, potatoes particularly. It's essentially, why are these foods so healthy? Why would they be so healthy?
Well, there's no question. Our body has evolved to digest plant foods. Our simian ancestors have been on this planet for 150 million years. Our gorilla and bonobo cousins right now are up in the trees eating leaves and fruits. And our digestive system has evolved to consume a whole plant food stream. And our cellular mechanisms, clearly we are carbohydrate burning organisms. Our Krebs cycle enzymes burn glucose and not fats preferentially. And the beautiful things about whole plant foods, they are largely made of carbohydrates that burn cleanly. You ingest carbohydrates in any form, whether it's the starch from a squash or a pumpkin or a potato. It burns cleanly, and the only waste products are carbon dioxide that you breathe out and water that you excrete. And so carbohydrates are not only a clean burning fuel, but all these colorful green and yellow vegetables and fruits bring in a panoply of vitamins and minerals and cofactors that help in the digestion of this really clean burning fuel. And as a result, you wind up lean and healthy, as we've discussed. And no matter how much carbohydrates in their whole form, the whole potatoes, rice that you eat, they cannot turn into fat. At the most, it turns into heat, and you radiate it off to the air. But people are afraid, oh, don't want to eat those carbs, makes you fat. No, carbohydrates will not make you fat. Eating them in the presence of fats may do that. So it's a clean burning fuel, leaves you healthy and lean, and basically it's what we were meant to run on in our digestive system, with big, soft, easy to pass bowel movements and trim bodies, verifies that as well. So eat plants, it's our natural fuel.
Potatoes are particularly, for me, a passion. So I think they're a great way to incorporate whole foods, plant-based living, for example. But first of all, the whole foods are mostly water, number one. Sure. Secondly, they're going to be fiber as well, okay, which is lacked by animal products. And thirdly, when you actually digest these foods, you are, as well as getting the carbohydrate, as you say, you're getting all the minerals, all the antioxidants, and that wonderful plethora of highly enriched food that washes over our arteries, as you say, cooling the processes of inflammation down. Now, potatoes have been demonized as being the cause of weight gain. John McDougall talks about the article, I think it was published many years ago, where they looked at cellular respiration and the respiratory quotient that goes on in the cell, and highlighted that, in fact, when the body senses the calorie intake is falling, it switches processes off. The body slows down. Actually, cellular metabolism starts to be slightly impaired, the thyroxine levels drop, etc. The body goes into the survival state. So again, it's sort of contradictory to what we've been told, that to lose weight, we should be restricting our calories. When in fact, if you enhance your calorie intake, you actually switch on all these processes, and most importantly, that repair process. So we see the respiratory quotient actually increase. So it doesn't actually end up gaining weight. I think the statistic was something to the point of 20 or 30 whole potatoes have to be consumed for 4 months before you gain 1/4 of a kilogram of fat, in terms of, about half a pound of fat. I would be hard pressed to find someone who can have maybe 8 to 10 whole potatoes a day.
Exactly.
A day. Now, we both have a mutual friend, Andrew Taylor from the Spud Fit, who showed really in no other better way that incorporating potatoes into his life not only saw a weight loss and those wonderful benefits, but he didn't gain that weight. He felt better, and he reversed these conditions that associated with it. A very, very interesting story with him is that he showed his results periodically through his year. And at one point he showed his iron levels, and the ferritin and the iron saturation had increased. Okay. And I rang him up and I said to him, "Oh, you've had an iron infusion, have you?" I said, "Oh, that's okay, but if you've had an iron infusion, it sort of defeats the purpose of what we're trying to say." And he said to me, "What are you talking about? What iron infusion? I don't know what you're talking about, mate." And I said, "But your iron levels have gone up. Everything's improved." He said, "Oh, I don't know what that means." And that to me was one of the key points. I thought, bang, there you go. The whole foods have everything we need, exactly. Whether it's just the potato, but what we can wonderfully do is incorporate corn, these other wonderful foods into the diet. So we see the cellular repair processes take place. Michael Greger talked about this at one point regarding intracellular, intramyocellular lipid accumulation, that you get this toxic buildup within a cell. But that there is also inherent mechanisms 24 hours a day breaking down these lipids, breaking down these intramyocellular lipids to try and remove them. That to me explains why people repair themselves, why we get an improvement in our health. Because if 3 times a day the cleaner is able to do their job without having more rubbish tipped into the room, eventually the room will be clear. Now it may take a week, could take a month, but eventually the body will repair itself. We have spoken before briefly about fasting. Now, can you tell me a little bit about fasting and perhaps the miracle that fasting is?
It's really a remarkable phenomenon. At True North Health Center, where I work, it's a converted apartment complex. We have 24 apartments. We can have an inpatient census of 48 folks. And they bring us the usual diseases: obesity, diabetes, clogged arteries, and a lot of inflammatory joint disease, etc. And again, it's from eating the standard Western diet, and all they really need to do is eat a whole food plant-based diet, and eventually they wind up healthy. Nobody really needs to fast. But we find that if the person meets certain basic criteria, they're not on medications that they can't stop, and they don't have severe kidney disease or type 1 diabetes. There's a couple of medical contraindications, but by and large, if the person's a suitable candidate, and we have them start drinking water, 6 to 8, 14-ounce glasses a day, within 72 hours, they go into ketosis, and the body shifts into a remarkable gear of cellular conservation. As you mentioned, thyroid function slows down, the body wants to conserve every precious calorie. But it also starts looking for things to throw into the cellular furnace to burn, because no more calories are coming in orally. So the body goes into this phenomenon called autophagy, where it looks into cells for junk DNA and old oxidized starches, and it grabs them and burns them. There's an internal purification on a cellular level that's quite scientifically documentable. And a number of other remarkable changes happen that we're only beginning to understand. If the body thinks it's starving to death, one thing that it doesn't want to waste energy on is running inflammatory reactions. So it turns off inflammation. And we see this within 10 days. I had a woman with rheumatoid arthritis. I came into her room making rounds, and she had tears going down her cheek. And I said, are you in pain? She says, no, this is the first time I've been able to close my fist in 10 years. It's wonderful. And so the anti-inflammatory properties are very marked. And also, teleologic reasoning, but if you're starving to death, something else you don't want to waste calories on is running a malignant tumor. That's a complete waste. And so malignant tumor growth, prostate cancer, breast cancer slows down. We've had 2 cases of lymphoma melt away. And it turns out that the body doesn't, as I said, don't want to waste energy on malignant tumor growth. So it releases molecules called sirtuins that silence the tumor-expressing genes. And so the body has this amazing anti-cancer gear it can shift into. The fasting unleashes all of this. And so it's a remarkable therapeutic tool. But as I make very clear to my patients in my lectures and videos, as powerful as the fasting is, what really matters is what you eat after the fast. It's the food stream day after day, week after week, month after month, washing through your cells that creates a lean, healthy body, or one with lots of disease processes. So during the fast, we send our people, even though they're fasting, we send them to cooking classes and food demos and have them watch videos and learn how to make this food at home. So when you come off the fast, you don't fall back into chicken and cheese land, because if people do, Cinderella turns back into a pumpkin within days. It's shocking how quickly the joints start hurting and the lungs start wheezing and the blood pressure goes up. The water fast is a jumping off place to a whole food plant-based diet. But it does have remarkable therapeutic qualities, so much so that healthy folks who can do a fast, we are encouraging what's called intermittent fasting, that everybody, if you're basically healthy, not in kidney failure, etc., everybody could do a weekend on water once a month from Friday to Monday, up to 5 days. A 5-day fast every month on water, I think would do wonderful things for the population in general and individuals. So everybody can take advantage of the fasting phenomenon. If they go to my website, drklaper.com, all spelled out DOCTORKLAPER.com, and click on webinars, I have one on fasting and how to do a good water fast.
And that was actually what encouraged me to do my water fast. So when I first met you early last year, I think I said to you, one of my first words were, I've just come off my 8-day water fast.
I remember.
And I remember how wonderful I felt. It was important though to recognize, isn't it, that when you do water fasting, it doesn't mean that you can still go around running a marathon and doing things. Because in fact, it's fasting that has been used inappropriately by weight loss advocates. And what we're talking about, the quick salesman who says, I can make you lose weight easily. Now, we know the mechanisms behind the low calorie or what people would think about the low carb, high protein movement. which is the next part I want to talk about. Incorporating fasting, what they essentially are saying to people is reduce your calorie intake, then we will make you work out so much and so hard that your body, when it starts to break down, breaks down protein, breaks down every single aspect of your body. It is crying out. And I, again, link that back to the idea of like trying to drive a car on no petrol. What we are doing to the engine is cruel. So what we are doing to the body when we put ourselves into this low carb, high protein state of dietary intake is a cruel state. We are no doubt wrecking the body. I don't know anyone who can look me in the eye and say they feel better. They may feel this slight elation with the ketosis at day 1 or day 2, but it very quickly falls away. They don't have the energy, they don't have the good sleep, and they certainly don't have the good mental health. They're often very unwell and very mentally depressed. They trickle out from that arena, and they then come into this idea of the high carb movement based around whole foods. So we're not talking about processed sugars, we're talking about the whole food, the potatoes, the corn, and the pumpkin, and they revitalize themselves and they feel so much better. As doctors, we're very good at getting that blood pressure down. We can give you the strongest tablets and we'll have it down. We can have you have that cholesterol down to absolutely 0 by giving you as much statin as we want. We're very good at being able to understand the mechanism behind these so-called benefits of the low-carb movement. What I think, though, we need to start looking at is expecting that hopefully the medical profession will now step up, and trailblazers such as yourself and Neil Bernard and Caldwell Esselstyn and John McDougall, who have been very strong influences for me, have really forged this wonderful pathway for now a new generation of health professionals to now step up and incorporate nutrition into not only our own lives, but into the dialogue we have with our patients.
Yes.
What's your message to a young Dr. Klaper who today is graduating from university? And I will preface it by saying I'm very, very defensive of the medical profession. You and I know exactly what it has entailed to go through medicine, how hard we worked both before and during the training. I understand why there aren't many doctors who believe in plant-based health. There is no conspiracy. There is no payments from the drug companies. This kind of garbage that exists is insulting. But there is very, very thick textbooks like Harrison's and Guyton and Hall and Last's, which we all have to learn, and Netter's Anatomy. Those books take up a lot of our time, so much so that the medical curriculum that I think is now taught would be so much more heavily dependent on findings of the last couple of years compared to what I learned, that there's no time for nutrition training. It's just no time. So I don't like people who, for example, want to blame doctors for not knowing this. Right. But we now have this remarkable ability now to incorporate it. So what is your message to that young Dr. Klaper?
Oh. Well, first realize that there's a book long ago, Everything I Need to Know I Learned in Kindergarten. Same thing. Hippocrates told us on day 1, let food be your medicine. And we don't, we let that blow right by. Stop. That is ultimately important advice. Realize, young Dr. Klaper, that you didn't learn anything because your professors don't understand nutrition. They don't honor it. They view it as a sissy science compared to surgery and internal medicine, intensive care. Nutrition's boring stuff. And realize your professors are eating the meat and dairy themselves, and they don't want to give up their steaks and their lobster and their Gruyere cheese, and so they're not going to tell their patients, and they're not going to tell you about them. But the truth is, we can't ignore Hippocrates' advice. Every meal changes us. Your blood is very different after a meal of cheeseburgers and pepperoni pizzas and chili dogs versus the rice and beans and greens and salads. And that's not a trivial difference. It's the difference in the computer world between 1 and 0. You either have cooked animal flesh and these adulterants in your bloodstream, or you don't, or you have healing nutrients. And chronicity is such a powerful force. Having your bloodstream pro-inflammatory week after week, month after month, year after year, it's going to inflict cellular and ultimately tissue damage. It's said At age 20, the face in the mirror looking back at you is the face that nature gave you. At age 50, the face in the mirror looking back at you is the face your choices gave you. And it's the choice of the burgers and the pizzas and the beer and the cigarettes and the arguments and the alcohol and all that toxic brew that modern life inflicts upon us is what ages us and what causes this inflammation and what initiates these diseases. Well, we're not helpless pawns. It's not our genetics. It's the food. And I have a plaque in my office that says, it's the food. And when my patients are sitting in front of me, overweight, hypertensive, diabetic, why do I have these diseases? It's the food. And the second line is really important. It's been the food all along. Stop asking for another sophisticated blood test or a scan. Run a whole food plant-based diet through your bloodstream. Stop the adulterants, and your body will know what to do. Healing will happen, and you're rewarded with a lean, healthy body that doesn't need the services of people like us.
And look, as a doctor, you're rewarded with having a patient before you who is remarkably healthier. Now, isn't that the most satisfying thing when we see?
It is. I tell my patients, it's wonderful. I basically don't want to see you again, or I want to see you in two places, in the natural food store and on the bicycle path. Other than that, I want to go live your life. I don't want you to have to need me for medical problems.
I have to close by asking you to, I always give you a very quick, wonderful quote on dairy and cow's milk. Now, a common question someone may come up to you and ask you, Dr. Klaper, I need to have cow's milk because that's where I get my calcium. So why shouldn't I drink cow's milk?
For the same reason you shouldn't drink moose milk or giraffe milk or horse milk or rat milk. Cow's milk is baby calf growth fluid. That's what the stuff is. And everything in that liquid, the hormones, the lipids, the sodium, the protein, the IGF-1, everything is in there to blow that calf up to a great big cow. And it will have adverse effects in our body. It does the same thing in people, but it's full of growth promoters. It promotes cancer growth. It promotes breast lumps and big prostate glands. And if you're a baby calf, you want a liquid that's full of growth factors. You're an adult human being. You need liquid full of growth factors, like again, a fireman needs to pour gasoline on his fire. So look in the mirror. If you got big ears and a long snout and a tail and you're a baby calf, enjoy your milk and cheese. But if you're not, then there's so much else to pour in your cereal, these almond milk and rice milk and all these confections. They're not the healthiest foods, but at least they don't have the estrogens and leukemia viruses and all the things that are in cow's milk these days. So free yourself from this idea that we have to have the milk of a cow. It's really silly. And to be told you must drink the milk of a cow every day for the rest of your life, that's not helpful advice to give to a patient, to say the least.
It's certainly not, and the fallacy that it uses is that that's the only source you can get it from. Well, the cow got its calcium from the ground. That's where it got the minerals from. Just like the fish that swims in the ocean, it got its omega-3 from the plants. That beautiful ratio of 4:1, the omega-6 of 4 and the omega-3 of 1. That I suggest is the way the concrete and mortar is perfectly aligned so as to create that cell wall in the beautiful ratio. Mm-hmm. The modern Australian and the American diet has a ratio of around about 20 omega-6 to 1 omega-3. Again, when I use this analogy, it's like having very, very, very poor mortar, and how can you expect your bricks to stay up in your house as they can? How would you expect them to be in the cell the same way? Nature has it figured out for us, and all we have to do is be out there and enjoying it.
Indeed.
Fantastic. Michael Klaper, thank you so much for your time today, and it's been wonderful to see you again. Welcome back to Australia, and we hope to see you again soon.
Oh, same here, and thanks for this great service to your watchers.
Fantastic. Thank you very much.
Take care.